This is probably the first and only scientific project I've ever been involved with where I'll be dead when the results come in. So it's something for my children, maybe. All right, it's a rather boring title, but I want to get across I think the very exciting aspect of this extremely long-term project. And if you wanted to, so just go back again. So we're basically trying to turn that into that. But as you can appreciate in the semi-arid zone, that takes quite a while. So you could also entitle this the biggest biodiversity and carbon bang for your buck. I've heard that a few times here. So we really want to talk about cost-effective reforestation. But there's sometimes competing goals with reforestation. You can reforest for carbon or biodiversity, and we're trying to figure out what that trade-off might be, or if indeed there is a trade-off. We have another project like this. Why am I showing a map of northern Queensland? Well, we started this the first iteration of this experimental approach in the wet tropics in a little place called Flentje up here. That project is still, well, it's more or less finished, but the same thing. Forest growing takes many years, but things grow a lot faster up there because they get over 3 meters of rain. This is the old paddock that we used, about 40 hectares, and just give you a shot of what it looked like before and then after planting. Unfortunately, it's not been going terribly well given drought situations even up in the wet tropics. Okay, but I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about the semi-arid version of this experiment, which is happening out at Minato. I think most people have been out there. Yes, it's a zoo, but they gave us 20 hectares and said, go for your life. You can plant this up and make a forest. So that's what we're trying to do. So the methods we're using, pretty standard, converting the previously cleared landscape to a secondary woodland or shrubland complex, classic mallee. Planting treatments that are modifying both plant diversity as well as densities, and then the long-term monitoring for various components of biodiversity as well as carbon. This is the planting treatment experimental design. So we have 10 blocks, each with 8 treatments, and you've got 3 diversity treatments. So we've got low, 1 species, medium, 3 species, and high, 10 species. Now all these species here are embedded within the 10 species complex. We have 2 density treatments, 3 and 1.5 meter spacing, as well as 2 controls, no management, and 1 slashing. And these are randomized in space amongst the 10 blocks. So when you put it all together, that's what it looks like, just under 20 hectares. We've also got some harvest plots for looking at total carbon content, so we can sacrifice those individuals. Just want to say, this is the only experiment of its kind in the world in a semi-arid environment. There is, as I said, the analog in the wet tropics. There's some other similar sorts of experiments going on in Western Australia, but this is the first time that these 2 important components of reforestation have been tested experimentally in Southern Australia. So these are the species. I won't go through them all. If you know a little bit about the mallee, these will look familiar to you. It's a bit of a trade-off about what was available, what actually grows reasonably well, as well as trying to get something a good representation of mallee vegetation. So we wanted both an overstory and an understory, if you can call those stories in a mallee. So the monitoring includes plant survival, obviously, and growth rates. Then the biodiversity response is also the vegetation structure, both the invertebrate and invertebrate use. And then we have some baseline remnant fragment sites for comparison. We're also doing above ground and below ground carbon, including soil organic carbon. So the survival, yearly monitoring for each plant, so they're all tagged. For the growth, we have either height for the things that grow up, or circumference, or to radius really, for the things that kind of grow out, like the shrub-based vegetation. And we're only really focusing on the most frequently planted species for those because of the intensity of the monitoring required. When you've got over 8,000 plants, you can't easily go out and measure everyone for growth rate. The vegetation just shows you the kind of the plot surveys we're doing in both the adjacent remnant vegetation as well as the transects through the paddock. And this is the vertebrate and invertebrate sampling design. So we do that yearly over 5 days and nights. We have pitfall traps. We have small vials. We have pan traps for bees. These are and roof tiles for small, usually mostly the reptiles, although we do get some invertebrates in there as well. Also get some pretty nasty little fights in some of these pitfall. If you don't check them right away, seriously like monster beast competitions. So just some shots there. We also use these little runways to funnel things into the pitfall traps. This is all pretty standard stuff, and colored balls for the bees. Sometimes we use these flying insect tent traps. And carbon, well, carbon takes a long time to build up in the soil, so we've only really done the preliminary pre-planting surveys. So we've done these ground-penetrating radar to get soil thickness. It's only about 1.5 meters to 2.5 meters deep, so it's pretty shallow soil. Probably won't surprise anyone. And then these soil cores, which we haven't really analyzed yet. We'll probably go back in 10 years and do this again to see if we have any plot treatment effects. So this is the planting history. We didn't plant enough in 2013, so we did it again in 2014. Almost everything died, so we did it again in 2015, and it didn't rain. And so now all the money's gone, and we have to find money for plants again. So this is an ongoing replacement project because we want to maximize the treatment effects. So that's not realistic from a restoration perspective, but it's realistic in planting things in semi-arid zone. And these are the different surveys we've done. We've got lots of volunteers, including my daughter, helping out. Some preliminary data. So you can see that this is the survival rates according to the diversity, high, medium, low, and density, high and low. From those planted in 2013, you can see almost everything died in 2014 plants. And we had slightly better success in 2015. But we're still required to replace quite a few things. This is highly variable among species. Encolina and Perosa doing particularly well, as Mariana, but some of them almost dying out completely. These are the 2014 and 15 results, again showing this collapse here, except for Encolina, which is a bit of a survivor. I highly recommend that species if you're going to do some planting in the mallee. Growth rates. Interestingly, we're probably seeing a density effect already. This is from the 2013 to 14 data. Slightly less, perhaps, in the 2014 to 15, but the low-density sites seem to be growing slightly. Now, this is a percentage growth rate, either height or width. Vertebrate captures, this is comparing the baseline, so the remnants, hell of a lot of vertebrates. Not so much happening in the treatments yet because we haven't analyzed much of the data, but we do have some preliminary stuff, so I wouldn't put a lot of emphasis on that. Quite a few bee species. Now, there are about 1,600 native bee species in Australia. We've collected about 30 species on the site and about 1,300 individuals, so it's really bee dense. Most of them are the Lasioglossum and Homolictus. 50% of the individuals are Lasioglossum lanarium, and then we get these little Homolictus here. We've also been getting a few of these Lipotriches and a couple of individuals of the Exonura, which apparently are quite special. So these are my colleague Toby Smith who collected all these. Some pretty fascinating stuff. Few honeybees, but not too many, and no blue-banded bees at all. Most of these are ground nesting species. And if you look at the effects, really the plots in the paddock have fewer bees than what you'd expect at forest edge or interior. And even after 6 months, we're starting to see a diversity effect on the bees. Again, these are all preliminary. I have an entire freezer and fridges full of specimens that a French intern will be spending the next 3 months identifying, and I'm not paying her. Vertebrate captures, what you'd expect out there. Lots of these little guys, thick-tailed geckos and legless lizards. Mostly mice and some frogs, but much more than you'd expect from your average destroyed paddock out in a semi-arid land. And really that's it to date, so keep tuned to this space and we'll update as we go along, and hopefully I will not be dead before the final results are in. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Corey. Do we have any questions?
Certainly. While waiting, question? You're not allowed to ask a question, Jane. You said you...
Self-seeding. Is that something you'll be monitoring at some stage?
Yeah, I failed to mention that, but in addition to the planted specimens, we're also getting seed transport mainly from birds, and there are there is a seed bank there. We thought it was completely dead because it had been about 80 years since clearing, but there is stuff that's volunteering itself. It's mostly in the Perosa kind of class of gums, but a few other small shrubs as well. But yeah, we're monitoring those through regular plot-based surveys. And the idea is that once we do have a canopy and birds are coming in, hopefully they'll shit everywhere and put in lots more stuff.
Haven't you been using the principles of biological succession, where the grasses cover the shrubs and the shrubs allow the trees to grow in shade?
Yeah, well, this is a heavily weeded area and really poor nutrient. So the thing we've been doing essentially is just slashing the grasses and some of the other weeds and try to give the seedlings, which are just tube stock, a little chance to get ahead. And once they do, they're away. We don't really have to worry about the weeds after that. Soil preparation, we thought about doing some burning and some scarification, but that proved to be too costly, even at that small scale. So we've just basically trying to make sure that once the seedlings are in the ground and they're doing all right, then we sort of leave them alone. There's someone out in the back here first.
Thanks. So do you have the data available about the density spacings and the cost associated with planting at those densities?
Yeah, and so I didn't put any of the economic data, but as you can imagine, if you have a 3 meter spacing versus 1.5, it's twice as much to do 1.5 because you need twice as many individuals. Well, actually, it's more than that. It's the square of that. So so far it seems like there is an effect of density both for growth as well as for survival. So the lower density sites have better survival and growth, as you might expect, because I didn't expect crowding to be an issue with tube stock over even as short as half a year, but it appears to be the case. And there is some preliminary evidence anyway that the diversity is higher in the higher diversity sites, but certain species do better in the lower density sites. So again, very preliminary data because we only have one good year of data so far. But once we get these replantings in again, I imagine that those effects will sort of tease each other out. Each one of these plots is only 25 by 25 meters, remember, too.
Is all the data available somewhere?
It's on my computer. No, it's not. It will be.
Corey, look, it's great, and collecting the economic data is really important. Not just the planting data, but are you collecting kind of analogues for the price of having the land, all of those decisions about scarification or not, what it is, the prices that you don't pay or you can't include, because ultimately that's when people take the results, you'll have the benefits and you'll have something about the costs.
It'll be relative costs only because our costs aren't going to be the same as someone who's planting 400 hectares. But we'll be able to say that for this response in diversity and carbon, this is more expensive than that. But the difference is irrelevant, or it's hugely different, worthwhile investing. We didn't do hydrology. We didn't have enough money. We haven't done any watering. We haven't done, all volunteer-based work. But we can cost all of those out in terms of person hours, as well as, of course, the seedling costs and all that sort of thing. The price of land, again, they gave us the land to use. Hopefully they won't decide to put another paddock on there and put bongos on it or something. Anyone from the zoo here, please hear that plea. I know you're skint, we all are. So the price of land isn't really going to be of the same scale, but I think just on those two main things, both for the carbon and biodiversity, what's the best trade-off for the lowest price? It's looking like now you could probably get away with the mid-diversity planting and a low density. But that's really, that's a little bit intuitive.